All right. Well, hello, welcome. My name is Brianna McWilliam, and I am an author, educator, and licensed creative arts therapist. And I've been in the field for about 13 years now. And I am wild and excited about love and attachment, specifically in adult relationships. And I help individuals struggling with insecure attachment go from feeling kind of fearful and stuck in their partnerships to calling in the soul-shaking partnerships that they want from a place of consciousness and self-sovereignty. And so, Kyle, I'm just going to hand it over to you to introduce yourself.
Hey, so my name is Kyle Benson. I'm a relationship coach. I help couples who feel pretty insecure or feel really disconnected from each other, kind of bridge the gap of insecurities so they can actually build a really secure, functioning relationship where they feel cherished, loved, and cared for. And so really helping them get through the miscommunication, the misunderstandings, taking parts of their own ownership of the problem that they create and changing the patterns in the relationship. So it's pretty hard work, but it's also really rewarding work. And so Brianna and I are going to talk a lot about kind of love and attachment today. And so we're going to kind of dive into that, and we'll share kind of our different opinions and experiences around this very important topic.
Mm-hmm. And for those of you that may just be joining us on this series, we've covered two previous questions before. The first one was, how do I communicate my needs in a relationship? And then after that, we talked about how can I spice up the romance in my relationship? And so, Kyle, maybe you can give us what the question is we're going to explore today.
So today we're going to explore a pretty deep question. I might consider it a pretty deep question. And it's a simple question. And in essence, we're answering the question, what is the difference between love and attachment? And really trying to define what attachment is and what is kind of love in a very mature adult sense. And so that's really the question we're exploring today. And Brianna, I'm going to hand it off to you and have you kind of start us off.
Sure. So this is a question that I hear a lot, and I think it's also a question that we all contend with, on a regular basis. And I really feel that when it comes to examining this question, there's sort of two misconceptions that often come up. And the first one is that attachment must be a bad thing. And the second is that love and attachment don't overlap at all. And so maybe what we can do to frame this video here today is to take a look at those two misconceptions. Mm-hmm. That sounds good. Okay. So first, I kind of want to tackle the idea that attachment is a bad thing. And it might require explaining a little bit about what attachment really is. And so attachment, as we talk about it in the field of psychology and attachment theory, is really, we're talking about it primarily as a body-based experience, that it's a part of your brain, in the limbic part of the brain, that creates synapses and is a behavioral mechanism that compels you to seek what's called proximity to a caregiver, particularly when we are younger. Because as a child, you need to be close to a caretaker in order to survive, in order to have your needs met. And also there was a lot of research done around a failure to thrive. And so we found that even if a child had a roof over their head, food in their belly, all of those needs were attended to, if they did not have a caretaker or a bonded connection, whatever the quality of that bond might be, but some kind of connection to a caregiver, then they would die. And it was called a failure to thrive. So attachment kind of emerged as this acknowledgement and realization that there's a behavioral mechanism within us that is inherent within us that drives us towards seeking proximity to some kind of caregiver. And so when we think of attachment as a bad thing, it's usually because we have that part of ourselves has been stimulated to seek proximity to or connection with someone that may not be the healthiest match for us, or may stimulate wounds that we've experienced in the past. And we may be attracted to them because they remind us of our previous attachment figures. And that is a certain groove that's been carved in our systems and in our brains, and we find ourselves being very drawn to, aroused by, and stimulated by that. So I will just add there are 6 dimensions of this according to Neufeld and Mate, and then I'm going to bounce it over to you, Kyle, in your experience of this. So when we think about attachment, 2 pretty well-known writers, Neufeld and Mate, talk about senses. So when we're talking about attachment, there's sort of an emphasis on physical proximity. So feeling touched, wanting to be held, physical affection. Because if you think about it, the first experience we have of being connected to someone is being held, like a sense of compression and warmth, right? Then there's also a dimension of sameness. And this you can see more so in toddlerhood, when children tend to seek things that feel more like it. Like they look for things that they recognize themselves in. And that sort of leads to belongingness and loyalty. So there's a sense of possession around someone, wanting to be either obedient to that person or faithful to that person. Then there is the fourth dimension would be significance. So feeling like you matter, or needing to feel as if you matter to someone that you are the closest to, and then seeking to please that person and gain their approval. And we see this a lot with children, particularly if they're in difficult childhood scenarios or maybe traumatic childhood situation where there may be an abusive parent or an emotionally abusive parent. What they need to feel significant. So what they do is they turn any bad behavior on the parent's part or any negative circumstance in on themselves. And they have to believe that they matter. And they have to believe that the parent is basically good, because I must be bad, I must deserve this. Because when you do that, it preserves the parent as a good attachment figure. And that's a protective mechanism, because the attachment figure, you have to matter enough to the attachment figure in order to feel safe. Even if it requires this sort of turning things in on ourselves and taking on more than really is our due. Because when you're a child, it's a mechanism that protects you in that way. And when we get into an adulthood, that's when the coping mechanism needs to be kind of dissolved and teased out a bit. But the fifth thing is feeling. So when we talk about attachment, it's sort of marked by you're looking to be emotionally open and vulnerable. So when you're attached to someone, you want to feel like you can take them into your confidence, that you can share deeper parts of you. And that leads to the last one, which is being known. So you want to feel like you are known, feeling like you are seen, feeling like you are understood by whomever it is that you are imbuing this confidence in, right? And to my mind, these are really just dimensions of intimacy. And so with that, I'll bounce it over to you, Kyle.
Yeah, I mean, I love those 6 examples. It's for an attachment. I agree with you a lot in a lot of ways. The way I describe it is it's a felt sense, right? Combining all those 6 different things of this sense of, am I securely and safely attached to this person? Do they know me? If I'm in trouble, can I reach out and will they respond? And essentially, if we boil it down to it, attachment is really about trust. Right? Can I trust this person to be there for me? And Sue Johnson's research on emotionally focused couples therapy, that's really what she talks about, right? It's, are partners available? Are they responsive? Are they engaged in the relationship? When you're hurting, can you reach out and will they respond? And what's interesting as adults, if we really have that secure attachment, when something goes wrong, and we already have that secure attachment, we have those experiences, we might not actually need to reach out to our partners to kind of regain that emotional stability or that attachment security, because we've already had those experiences. That felt sense is within us. And even just a mental representation, as the research talks about, will actually help calm you down. And so you start to build this internal resilience from your relationships. And that's really a really key thing about someone who grew up in a family where that caregiver was available, was responsive, who helped offer these 6 things that Brianna was talking about. And that really led to them kind of developing those type of internal working models, as they might put it, or their self-esteem, their self-worth. And even building on that, people who grew up in insecure environments or had their caregiver where they internalize stuff about themselves, one of the things they can do is start to take those internal narratives, that shame-based stuff, externalize it, process it, and actually start to move to what attachment theorists called earned security. And this is one of the things I do a lot with couples, is we break down and get into the triggers, the narratives, the beliefs they have about themselves, and we start to examine them, and we start to figure out which beliefs are mistaken beliefs and which beliefs can actually empower them to have a better sense of self. a better sense of security in the relationship, and kind of create this mutuality of sameness, and also being really known by your partners, which Brianna was talking about. And just the last little piece is, I think, kind of what Brianna was talking about really earlier on. It's a system within us, right? It's this drive to be close to someone that's been evolutionarily ingrained in us as humans. And we have this drive for connection, this drive to be close to our caregivers or someone who is really important to us. We are actually socially wired that way. And we'll probably talk about this a lot more, but that's just something I really want to emphasize because it's so important.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I would say, for like bringing this into the realms of how we experience in our day to day, oftentimes for individuals that have insecure attachment, we have a tendency to find ourselves drawn to partners that will confirm our early models. Mm-hmm. So as I mentioned, the way we've responded to those early attachment experiences, we responded to them in that way because they were serving some kind of protective function. So then we tend to seek out partnerships that repeat those patterns because we have learned that that's the protective way to be, even if we are experiencing it as unhealthy for us, as holding us back, right? Mm-hmm. And in my perspective, I sort of assume a psychospiritual perspective on that, which is that I believe that the essence of you, or your spirit, or the part of you that is desiring maybe a more substantial relationship, has kind of grown beyond that model. And so I think of it as you are drawn to these partners and you are calling them in because the model is asking to be revised. And sometimes we have to experience that contrast in our lives, or the discomfort of butting up against a pattern several times before we are aware of and willing to address what it actually means for us, like on the inside.
Yeah. And I want to toss this in really quick. A lot of people who are insecure and who want to become secure, I think there's almost a fantasy that roadmap is easy. Oh, if I just become secure, everything will be fine. But actually, to go from insecure to secure is kind of building a tolerance of that discomfort and learning to kind of not react to that model you had developed earlier, but actually tolerate the discomfort and intentionally choose to behave in a new way that's going to get you a new experience in relationships or in love that can really change that attachment style at its foundational level.
Mm-hmm. And it's interesting too, because we also struggle with this idea that I have to go from where I am to where I want to be, right? Or that I'm insecure, so I have to become insecure before I can have something beautiful and wonderful in my life. Mm-hmm. And I actually don't believe that's true. I think also a lot of secure partners who will tell you, look, if you think getting married to a secure person is going to be the solution and you're going to live happily ever after, then I've got news for you. Like, the work doesn't stop there. No. Like, we're always in process. And I think, it's almost like sometimes we're looking for permission. Like, if I just become secure, then I can have that all-encompassing, contented, love, satisfied feeling that's going to make me happy for the rest of my life. And I can stop feeling all these insecure or anxious or avoidant feelings, and it's all going to be great. And the thing is that even secure people have a spectrum of avoidance and anxiety that they are also always contending with on a regular basis. And when we're talking about insecure attachment styles, we're just talking about a frequency of attitude and behavioral expression. Yes. But it's just like, but what helps is raising consciousness and awareness and insight into how often you are acting on the frequency of your inner attitude and your behavioral expression, right? Which is to say that I believe that we are all already secure. It's just that you have gotten into a habit of thought and you've gotten into a habit of behavior that has elicited a certain response from your partners in the environment that have led you to believe something that isn't really accurate about yourself. And so part of it is like, stop beating yourself up for stuff and gaining that observer position. I think we talked about in our last video about being mindful and aware of and present in the body so that you can see those facets coming up, or those limiting beliefs coming up, or you feel an embodied impulse to respond or react in a certain way. And that is that old wiring that is coming up because you have experience. I mean, it's embedded in your limbic system and in your synapses, and it is something that's going to be there. But over time, you can work that out. I mean, we can talk about treatment methods and things like that. But I just wanted to say that I think also part of what happens is sometimes we talk about these things like attachment styles or being secure or insecure, and people feel like, I'm not secure. I have to be this other thing that's perfect and great before I can get the thing that I want. And I think what I would emphasize is that no, you just gotta accept where you are and forgive yourself for where you are, and then allow for the fact that you can be in process with these things and engage with the things that you want, as long as there's an allowance for yourself. And if you can allow more in yourself, you can allow for more in your partner.
Yes. And that's so beautifully well said. And I think just reflecting on that, right? The person who internalizes kind of those early experiences, that sense that, oh, I must continue to change to become this other person, perpetuates the very problem. Mm-hmm. Right? And particularly with anxious individuals, and I'll speak from my own personal experience, we work super hard to try to fix what's broken in us. But the reality is, my path to security was to actually accept what I thought was fundamentally wrong with me as just a part of who I am, or my own insecurities. And then that acceptance allowed me to kind of become more secure with my insecurities and choose to behave, or take those insecurities and choose to behave in a very different way. So instead of reacting, like one of the things in a really unhealthy relationship where I was behaving really insecurely is I would check my phone all the time, or I would protest and cause a fight to try to get some reassurance in the relationship. Whereas now, if I'm feeling distant from my partner, or if I'm feeling like there's an issue going on, I can just say, hey, I'm feeling distant from you, or hey, you know what, there's something going on with me and I just really want to connect with you and talk to you and kind of figure out what it is so we can work together and solve it. And that's kind of the behavioral thing that you were talking about, Brianna, earlier, is we become insecure, I think, is really kind of expanding our capacity in understanding the different paths we can take. Right. And you talk about kind of the synapses, right? The connections from an insecure attachment. We have these neurological pathways that get developed. And, secure people feel insecure. They feel anxious. They feel avoidant. They feel overwhelmed by the things. But what they do differently is they have a broader spectrum on how to behave, because they've chosen and had good experiences where it's been safe enough for them to stay engaged or explore what's going on with them emotionally, what's going on in their thoughts, what's going on in their belief system, and actually choose to change that behavior and get new experiences that lead to that sensation of security, which is that felt sense. And it doesn't mean you're always going to feel secure, because you will feel insecure. I definitely feel insecure from time to time. And Brianna, I'm sure you would say the same thing. Mm-hmm. But it is having a different way to deal with that sense of insecurity, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think the point you raised too is that oftentimes, maybe what qualifies an insecure response versus a secure response is like, secure person may become aware of, ooh, that's a negative thought and or feeling, and therefore I'm not going to give more time, energy, and or attention to it. Or I'm going to choose not to pursue that any further. Whereas oftentimes individuals that have insecure attachment have a negative thought and or feeling, and then they think, oh, that must be true about me. And so there's sort of a different platform from which they jump into that kind of material. And usually it's because at the foundation of experience, there's a basic premise of worthiness or not worthiness. Mm-hmm. And so that becomes something difficult to contend with. And then when we are always circling around and coping with worthiness stuff, we develop those defense mechanisms or coping skills that we adopt as our strengths. And so then it becomes very hard when we start talking about these types of things and attachment related things, because it's almost like we're asking people to give up their biggest strength. And then they're like, well, that's the thing that has served me for so long, and you're asking me to give up my identity. So for example, sometimes we learn how to be strong and independent as a way to get through whatever it is that we've experienced. But the shadows, I'm going to call it the shadow side, but the shadow side of that is that you also become kind of emotionally inaccessible and unavailable, or you can be, right? You don't know how to let people in. You don't know how to accept help. You don't have to ask for help. Okay. Then there's or on the other hand, maybe you're really good at taking charge and people depend on you to get things done. Right. But then the shadow side of that is now you're overworked and overwhelmed and you don't know how to delegate, and you're going to burn yourself out, and that becomes a house of cards. It's going to fall eventually. Right. Mm-hmm. Maybe you become sensitive and caring, and so people rely on you for nurturance and support, and that makes you feel sought after and important. But it can also mean that you could be quick to take offense and feel pushed around by other people's emotions. Or you take it on yourself to sacrifice things of yourself so that you feel as though that's going to make the world go round. And that's taking on a lot more than is your due. Mm-hmm. And so I feel that those become narratives that we get stuck in. And I think part of the work of working with individuals that have insecure attachment is realizing that those strengths, you don't have to let go of those strengths. Those strengths don't have to be something that goes by the wayside. It's just something that you then have to come into conversation with. And then you have to kind of maybe soften the edges of that a little bit and think about things not so much in an extreme, but understanding that the expression and the manifestation of those things can be a little bit softer. And we can allow for there to be some gradation in the way in which they are expressed.
Yeah, essentially what you're talking about is flexibility, right? Mm. It's the sense of, right, and I think you highlight something so beautifully is people who might identify as insecure is they have these coping strategies that have worked really well for them at one point in time. And usually that coping strategy also becomes a self-identity, right? It's a core of who they are. And so, that sense of unworthiness, helps create some other things and serves a purpose in some ways. But when that becomes rigid, then you get stuck. And that's where a relationship gets stuck, right? That person who's really independent and is really focused on, well, I just have to do everything by myself, right? That makes it really hard for your partner to feel like they can actually care for you, because anytime they're getting close or anytime they're trying to support you, you might either attack them, you might think they're controlling you, you might call them intrusive. And so it makes it really tough to build that intimate relationship. And so what Brianna's kind of talking about is this not neglecting your strengths, not throwing them away, honoring them, and also becoming a little bit more flexible in terms of how you bring those strengths to the table. Because taking those strengths and those things that have been really useful for you and throwing them away wayside, I don't think it's going to be helpful at all. But it's being able to honor them and also have some flexibility in them that can really help kind of move the relationship in a direction that can help you grow and go through this process of, becoming more secure, of creating more secure relationships. So I kind of want to bring in the piece a little bit about love too. And so Brianna, we've talked a lot about attachment. So where do you think love comes into kind of all this stuff when we're talking about insecure styles and secure styles? Where does love come in there?
Well, I feel that love is really more the ability to reside most authentically in this sense of self. So I have kind of a spiritual perspective on this. But basically, it's your ability to sort of fill up your own circumference in such a way that you don't become egoically attached to this idea that who you are and your value and what you bring to the table and your ability to love in general is sourced from something outside of you. So
could you just kind of pause you? Could you explain just one more time what egoic attachment is? So someone who might not understand that word understands it.
Yes. So first, I'll break that down first. So to my mind, there's kind of two forms of attachment that come into play, and they impact how we think of and experience love. So egoic attachment is this idea that things have to come to you and they have to look a very certain way. And if they don't look that way, then they're not good. And so really the way around that is to tap into the feeling expression or the essence of the thing that you want as opposed to the details of it. And so that means that you start to allow what you really want to come into your sphere, as opposed to it has to come in a certain package. So for example, I'm giving you an example of egoic attachment. Let's say that you want to lose 15 pounds and you want a shiny new red car to make your commute easier. Let's say your high school reunion's coming up in 3 months. You want to lose 15 pounds and you want a new red car to reduce your commute to work. You're sick of public transit. So you say, okay, universe, I'm going to try this affirmation stuff. If it is in greatest service of all and to myself, I would like to manifest a shiny red car and lose 15 pounds before my high school reunion. So a week goes by and your cousin shows up at your door and they have a shiny red bike. Bought it for your cousin for his birthday, doesn't fit him, lost the receipt, can't return it. Hey, do you want this bike? Now you take one look at the bike and you're like, what am I going to do with the bike? And have no idea that this could in fact be the answer to your query to the universe. Because imagine, maybe if you got that red car, you'd be sitting in traffic every day. And rather than making your commute shorter, you're getting to work late and your boss is now on your butt. So you have to stay late at work. Additionally, your insurance rates goes up, so you have to make more money. Red cars get pulled over more often than any other car on the road. So now you're paying for all the extra tickets you're getting. And you're gaining weight because you aren't walking that extra mile to and from public transit every day. So the car actually would be a detriment to everything that you are asking for. But the bike gets you to work early because there's no traffic in the bike lane. You are not polluting the world, so it's in service of all. Maybe your boss likes the fact that you're getting there to work early. Maybe now you have a promotion on hand, so you're making more money than you would have been, whereas with the car you would have been losing money and working twice as hard for it. And you are now losing weight at a rapid rate because you're burning 3 times the calories you normally do. But you thought that the answer to the thing that you wanted had to look like a shiny red car and a diet pill or something like that, when all you needed was a bike. But we are not programmed to think that way. And we don't look out into the world and at our partnerships like that. We think my partner has to look this way, has to have this job, has to have that much money, has to do this, this, and this, and this, and this for me in order for me to be happy. Mm-hmm. And we miss the red bike almost every single time. And that's when we start getting into red flag conversations, which I won't get into now. But that's an egoic attachment. So, but if we are to look at this from a clinical perspective, we're thinking about this in terms of biological attachment. So that's when you believe that someone is essential to your survival because they mirror a pattern of affect and behavior that lights up that limbic part of your brain, that primitive part of our brain that says, this person reminds me of my early attachment figures, and that is what I know of love. And so that has a resonance within my body, a physical response within my body that makes me think this must be love, because those imprints have been etched on the most primitive aspects of myself. And so now I feel like they are essential to my survival, and I will suffer anything in this relationship in order to make it work. We're going to make it work, right? Mm-hmm. So that, to my mind, is sort of a biological attachment. But of course, there's an overlap between the two, because if you are feeling that way, then you are also constructing beliefs around your feelings so that you are making that true. Equally, if you think that way, you are going to start to feel that way, because there is an interrelationship between mind and body, consciousness and the heart, the mind and heart, head and heart. So, Harville Hendricks refers to this as, take a psycho-spiritual approach, refers to it as the imago. So that the imago, we all carry within us an imago, and that is an image of the perfect partner who is all the good and bad things of both parents, as well as all the things that we wanted but never received. And when we see hints and or inklings of that in someone, we immediately physically and egoically attach ourselves to that person. So that is just to tease out these ideas of what is egoic attachment and versus biological attachment.
Yeah, and I kind of want to, from a couple's perspective, bring that in a little bit too, because what you're talking about is there's these expectations that my partner must be this way for me to be happy, for me to be satisfied. And what's so interesting, and this goes back to the research in the Love Lab, or Dr. Gottman's Love Lab, is we discovered that 69% of relationship problems never go away. And so we have couples come to this Love Lab, we sit them down, have a conflict conversation, and then they go away and they come back a few years later. And what's interesting is they often pick the exact same item 3-5 years later that they talked about, a little bit, or the 5 years before. And instead of it being 5 years, it looks like 5 minutes. And so we had this fantasy that our partner must be emotionally expressive, or they must be these other ways. And we get so caught in that egoic attachment that we also neglect the other things that we actually really liked about them that might not have something to do with that. And, these personality differences, or these different ways that people show up, can really make things difficult, especially when we have a fantasy of who our partner should be. And if you're someone who's emotionally expressive and finds emotions really intense and lives through that lens of the world, and you're with a partner who's really calm, isn't really in touch with their emotions, if you have a conflict and they're kind of calm and kind of dull and not emotionally engaged, you might think, well, they don't care about me. Because my idea is they must be emotionally reactive or emotionally intense as I am for our relationship to matter. But the reality is just, that same calmness might have been really attracted to you in the first place. And so sometimes the things that we're attracted to initially, they kind of spark that initial attraction, but they ignite the conflict later on. And so this is I think the process of exploring your egoic attachment, as Brianna says, while also honoring your biological attachment. Am I saying that right, Brianna?
Yeah. And I think also it's defining your perspective, right? Because calm doesn't necessarily mean emotionally detached. Mm-hmm. It may be that that's just their volume,
right?
And equally, it kind of speaks to the 5 love languages a little bit, mm-hmm. where, I was having a conversation with a friend recently, and we did those Myers-Briggs personality tests, and we were so opposite on the spectrum, but still managed to find a point of contact, right? And so it's almost like things are within your perception. So for example, from the perspective of someone who may have a high volume or a high emotional volume, or is very effusive and expressive, they may look at someone who is, to them, calm and emotionally disconnect. And that's their narrative, and that's their language for their experience, because from their perspective, being emotional is up here, right? Right. Now let's take someone else who's maybe even more calm and not as responsive. And they might look at this person who's in the middle and be like, oh, they're really effusive. Meanwhile, this person up here looks at them and says, oh, they're really disconnected, And so it's like, you have to also take into account where you're standing, yeah, and the perspective from where you're standing.
You judge other people's how you judge yourself.
Exactly.
Right. The way your identities, the ways you conceive yourself, is how you judge other people. And what Brianna's offering is that judgment is probably incorrect. And you really need to, instead of letting that judgment come out and demand your partner to become more emotionally expressive, to sit with that and going, well, what is it that I actually am needing here? Why is this so important to me? To actually explore and build kind of that flexibility, instead of reacting from this emotional place, sitting with it, engaging it, and trying to understand what's really going on here for me. Is this something I have to work on? Is there something that needs a shift in the relationship? And exploring that. And that, I think, is really kind of where we start to get into more mature love, where we're able to kind of really examine and let our partner be flawed as they are, and ourselves be flawed, and us still making things work and still cherishing each other and being loyal to each other. And that, for me, is really mature love, is this sense of, you're different than me. We're going to have our challenges. Those are always going to come up. But I'm committed to you. And I believe that when things come up, we're going to work through it. There's going to be days where I'm going to be pissed off and I might not like you, but I do love you. And I'm going to stick it out and try to work through this. And that is helped by the attachment, the biological attachment, but that ego attachment, I think, while it can be beneficial at some points, can also cause a lot of issues as well. Would you say that's true, Brianna?
Yeah. And one thing I would add is I'm not sure that your perspective would necessarily be incorrect, because it will always be correct in your experience.
Right.
However, I will say that we have an expectation that we all meet on the same playing field, and we don't. We will only ever be able to see things from within our experience. However, through things like empathic communication or deep structure communications and whatnot, we can come to a place of understanding where the other person is coming from, accepting that it may not necessarily be our felt experience, but that we understand where they're coming from and the language that they're using. And then that's when you reach a place of discernment. So for example, let's say that my partner is someone who expresses their love through acts of service, and they're never going to be an emotionally effusive person. And that's just not how they are built. It's not something they even want for themselves. And if you want that for yourself and you're expecting them to give it to you, then you are placing a condition of love on that person. And so, but if you can learn that their language is acts of service, and if you can learn that, yes, they love you, but it's not going to look that way that you want. If you can learn their language and come to accept that, wow, they are loving me so much in this moment because of these services that they are providing, and I am going to allow that in to understand that they are loving me to the extent of their capacity, that's when discernment comes in, because then that's when you start to ask yourself, can I find these other ways? Because not everything has to be on my partner. Can I find other ways in my experience to fill up that piece that I feel like I need emotional response, or I need more effusive expression? Can I get that in other facets of my life and be satisfied to know that this person is giving me all that they can? And if I can be, then maybe that's when we speak to our values in relationships, right? Well, this thing is not, it's a 2 out of a 10. So yeah, that's enough for me here, right? But if it's not, then that's when you have to start questioning your egoic attachment. Because if it's not enough, it doesn't mean you have to stop loving them. It just means that it may not be the right fit, and that you will find someone who could meet you in that place. I don't think that you then have to, sometimes we say we have to lower our expectations. I don't think it's possible to do that. But I think it is possible to become more discerning and clear on how we are experiencing things and receiving information. And understanding that our desire is ever expanding. And when we fall in love, I really believe it's that we see a part of ourselves that is calling for integration. And when we find someone, they become a point of focus for that part of ourselves that's asking to be expressed and discovered and found out. And so then the joyful kind of exploration and process becomes, in the contrast that you experience once you get to know that person, is where are their boundaries? Where do they begin and end? Where do I begin and end? And this negotiation, this kind of recipe that happens in relationships where you figure out, this is going to be satisfying enough for me, and my value scale on that thing is like a 5. This isn't going to be enough for me, and my value scale for that thing is like a 10. So it becomes this kind of complex conversation. But I think it's important to realize that we are always only ever going to be within our own experience, and to accept that that means we have to be responsible for showing up for ourselves, not abandoning ourselves, like really showing up to the table with in our fullest self, I call it self-sovereignty, and being willing to meet the other person in that place without placing a set of conditions or egoic attachments onto them.
Yes, I love all the stuff you weaved into there. And one of the things that I'm going to pull out just for a moment is this egoic attachment and this desire for your partner to be someone who they might not be. And essentially what you just kind of highlighted is that when you're able to examine that egoic attachment and really define what is enough for you in a relationship, what your expectations actually are, and where your needs are versus kind of this massive want list you might have, you then get to get a real perspective of what's going to work in a relationship for you. And that might not be the partner you're with. But the problem is that egoic attachment can sometimes cause us to project onto our partners and say, well, if they just change and become this other person, then, I'll be happy. And then they stay in these relationships for 3, 10, if you even talk to people who have been together for 37 years, where they're actually miserable, where they saw the red flags before, but they didn't want to believe them. And they had that what I would call almost a fantasy bond of, well, this person will become this person eventually if I just change them. that's not a foundation for a healthy relationship, right? You have to, in a secure sense, accept that the other person is imperfect, examine kind of their values. And when I work with singles who are dating, we really focus on, like, does this person align with the values that you have? Are they going to be someone who matches is good enough for you to really build that relationship and is enough for them to show up where you need them most? And if they're not, it doesn't mean that they're fundamentally a wrong person. It just means there might not be a good match for you. And so this is, I think what Brianna's talking about is, this is some really important, deeper stuff, is when you do that inner work and you start to accept what your needs are, you can then start to accept other people and see whether they're going to fit that, kind of that level of what those values are. And that then becomes the foundation for building a really secure attachment.
Right.
And there's actually a great book. I just went to an event with John and Julie Gottman last night. They have a new book called 8 Dates. And it's these 8 conversations that explore commitment and trust, conflict, sex and intimacy, money and work, family life and dreams. And these things are essential conversations that you can get a deeper perspective of yourself and your partner, and either figure out areas that you guys need to start communicating better on and work on, or decide if, we're just so different in these areas, and that's kind of a boundary for me, and I'm going to have to walk away from this relationship. And really being honest with yourselves about that. And I'm not saying that's easy, but that's, I think, where really mature love can come in, is that it starts with that acceptance, that acknowledgement of yourself, acknowledgement of the other person as different, and really growing together as separate individuals and as a unit together. So it's been over an hour, so I want to be respectful of our time.
Yeah.
Is there any little last things you want to say in terms of love and attachment? You've been saying some really amazing things. Is there any last little piece you want to add?
I think the last piece I would add is just to have people who maybe are watching this to think about, and maybe even comment below this video, how might they define love? How would you define attachment? And what would you think is the difference between the two? And then I would also just add that if anyone's interested in what their attachment style might be, I've put a quiz in the link in the caption of this video. And I know, Kyle, you have some goodies to give away too for anyone that wants to learn more about what you do.
Yeah. And I think, kind of continuing the conversation in this video, really exploring what are the things that make me feel loved, and kind of where that limit is, instead of it just being, well, my partner must be emotionally expressive, actually put it on a scale from 1 to 10, as Brianna said, right? Realizing there's flexibility. And like with sexual desire, when I'm working with couples and sex things, like they often have this idea that either I'm 100% turned on or I'm not turned on at all. And that's not how our desire works, right? There's a spectrum. And even in values of conflicts, how important is this topic to me? Well, you know what? It's a 9 to me. And then the other partner, it's like, well, it's a 2. Well, no wonder we're fighting over this issue. Let's actually, try to figure out what's going on here. And so that's another thing to measure too, of, how important is this sensation or this thing? And then exploring the egoic attachment that comes with that too. So kind of toss that in the comments, and then Brianna and I will respond to those as best we can. If you're in a relationship, one of the things in an attachment sense that I really focus on is intimacy. I'm an intentionally intimate relationship coach. And so one of the things that will be in the links below is an Intimacy 5 challenge. And so these are 5 challenges that are going to really bring in your egoic attachment, are going to bring in that biological attachment, and cause you to kind of sit with the discomfort of being close to someone. And for you to stay in that space with another person and just notice the thoughts, the feelings, the narratives that come up, and really challenge yourself to stay engaged and build that capacity to be close and tolerate the discomfort that comes from that level of intimacy for just a short period of time. And then you're going to get to separate and think about it. And if you choose to do some of the challenges, a lot of couples have found them really powerful. Some people have found them really overwhelming, and that's pretty intentional. But going down that path, you're going to get some insight into yourself and into your partner, either way, or regardless of the outcome for that exercise. thank you very much for joining us. We'll be doing many more of these and some Facebook Lives coming up. So please look for the links for the next video. And we look forward to talking to you then.
Absolutely. Like and subscribe. We've got much more to come.
All right. Bye, guys.